Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I wasn't looking for a fight, I just wanted peace, a beer, and a quiet weekend at the lake. But when a letter arrived demanding $30,000 for a cabin 40 miles away, I knew something was wrong. By the time the drones came, it wasn't about rules anymore. I never considered myself the type to get caught up in drama. I paid my taxes, kept my lawn trimmed, smiled politely at neighbors I didn't really like, and tried not to interfere with anyone else's business. Willow Creek was, for the most part, a decent place to live. Clean sidewalks, quiet nights, and just enough trees to make you feel like you weren't suffocating in suburbia. My house sat near the back of the cul-de-sac, 2 stories of beige conformity, with a mortgage I had finally killed last year. It was the kind of place you could forget existed the moment you turned the corner. And I was fine with that. The Homeowners Association, the ever-present HOA, was part of the deal when I moved in 9 years ago. Back then, I figured it was just a group of bored retirees playing government. They'd send out newsletters full of passive-aggressive suggestions and host potlucks where someone always brought Jell-O with raisins. I paid my dues on time, followed the paint color palette when I replaced the shutters, and didn't question the rules too much. Why would I? It kept the place orderly, predictable, safe. That illusion cracked the moment I met Karen Woods. She'd been president of the HOA for the last 3 years, re-elected by a slim margin after ousting a guy who wanted to plant wildflowers along the sidewalks. She was efficient, polished, and terrifying in that way only people who think Excel spreadsheets are sacred texts can be. Slim frame, salt and pepper Bob, wore cardigans like armor. If she smiled at you, it was only because she was already loading a fine into your mailbox. Still, we had no direct problems. Until the lake house. It wasn't even a house, really. More like a glorified cabin with plumbing. 1 level, 2 bedrooms, and a wraparound porch that screamed beer at sunset. It sat near Lake Huron, about 40 miles out, tucked away from the mess of HOA oversight and soul-sucking uniformity. I bought it in April. Quiet transaction, clean title. LLC ownership for tax reasons. I didn't tell many people about it, not because it was a secret, but because it felt like something for me and my daughter Emma. A weekend retreat from fluorescent lights and artificial smiles. Emma was 12 going on 30, smarter than most adults I knew, and tired of the HOA's endless rules. When I showed her the photos of the cabin, her eyes lit up like Christmas. "Do they allow dogs?" she asked. I told her they didn't allow anything, because there was no they. That sealed it. We went there for the first time one weekend in May, cleaned up the yard, patched a broken step on the dock, roasted hot dogs over a fire pit. No security patrols, no lawn height inspections, just birds, bugs, and a silence so deep you could hear your own brain reboot. It was heaven. I figured that was that. We'd use the place on weekends, maybe longer during school breaks. I still lived and worked out of my house in Willow Creek. Paid my dues, mowed my lawn, waved to Karen when she slow-rolled past my mailbox in that creepy white Buick of hers. Nothing changed until a letter arrived. Plain envelope, HOA seal, my name in block print. I opened it on a Tuesday evening, standing in my kitchen with a beer in one hand and leftover Chinese in the other. Inside was a single sheet of paper, professionally worded and cold as an autopsy report. On notice of assessment, $30,000 due immediately. It went on to say that I had violated Section 6.3 of the Willow Creek HOA Charter, unauthorized extension of property interest. According to their logic, by purchasing another dwelling without HOA oversight, I had jeopardized the structural integrity and tax uniformity of the neighborhood. Whatever the hell that meant, I reread it twice. Then again, was this a joke? A clerical error? April Fools in May? Nope. The last paragraph threatened further action if I failed to remit payment within 30 days, including but not limited to legal escalation, community censure, and restriction of access to shared amenities. I stared at the paper like it was written in a language only sociopaths understand. $30,000 for buying a cabin outside the HOA's jurisdiction. I didn't even know Section 6.3 existed. I called the number at the bottom of the letter, and Karen herself picked up. "James," she said, all saccharine and smug. "I was expecting your call." "Karen," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "Whoa, what the hell is this?" "A notice of violation," she said, like she was explaining shoe sizes to a toddler. You failed to disclose your secondary property, which is a direct breach of community cohesion standards. Community cohesion? What? It's 40 miles away. It's not even in the same county. I understand your confusion, she said sweetly. But our charter is quite clear. As a primary resident of Willow Creek, your acquisitions impact the valuation model of this neighborhood. You cannot simply expand your holdings without approval. You have no jurisdiction over that property. She didn't even blink. That's a matter for the board to determine. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. She had to be bluffing. This had to be some HOA fantasy land where logic came second to control. I dug out my property records, deed, LLC filings. Everything checked out. That cabin wasn't under any HOA. Not then, not now. Still, the next day, my access card to the community pool stopped working. That weekend, the mailbox key jammed. On Monday, Emma got turned away from the tennis courts because our account had been flagged for delinquency. It wasn't a bluff. It was a siege. If the letter had been absurd, what followed was downright surreal. You don't expect to get steamrolled by an HOA, not when you're a grown man who pays his bills and owns his house outright. But Karen apparently didn't get the memo that HOA rules weren't a substitute for federal law. The morning after Emma got turned away from the tennis courts, I drove straight to the HOA office. It wasn't a real office, just a rented storefront tucked between a dog grooming salon and a vape shop, the kind of place that smelled faintly of artificial citrus and self-importance. The walls were plastered with community awards and inspirational quotes about order and harmony, which I found vaguely threatening in context. Karen was already there, of course. She sat at a pristine white desk with a stack of manila folders like they were dossiers on national security threats. Her expression when I walked in was pure smugness, as if she'd been waiting for me like a spider under a porch light. "James," she said, setting down her pen with theatrical precision, "we have a lot to discuss." "No, we really don't," I said, tossing a copy of the deed for the lake house onto her desk. "This is my property. It's in Emmett County. It's not under Willow Creek jurisdiction. You're not the goddamn mayor of Michigan." She smiled like I'd just proven her point. "Our legal team reviewed your documents. Technically, yes. The property is outside HOA bounds. But your residency here creates a structural obligation. By owning 2 residential properties, you dilute your tax-based loyalty to Willow Creek." Tax-based loyalty? That's not a real phrase. Section 6.3 allows for interpretation. We've exercised it. Section 6.3 is bullshit, and so is this fine. Karen didn't flinch. The fine stands. You've disrupted the balance of communal equity. Your failure to disclose has triggered our escalation protocol. Jesus Christ, it was like arguing with a badly programmed chatbot. "I'm not paying you 30 grand, I said. "Then I'm afraid we'll have to proceed with enforcement measures." And she meant it. Within days, my HOA account was flagged as delinquent. I received a second notice, now demanding $33,000 due to non-compliance penalties. I ignored it, so they doubled down. A community patrol car started parking across from my house every evening. Some guy named Dave, who used to wave at me while walking his Labradoodle, now took photos of my driveway with a telephoto lens like he was scouting for a drone strike. Trash pickup mysteriously skipped my address. Twice. Then came the neighbor concern forms, a charming little HOA invention where people could anonymously report violations. I started getting 2 or 3 a week. Lawn 2 inches too long. Garbage bins not returned to the garage within 90 minutes. One even accused me of operating an unlicensed rental unit because Emma had a sleepover. I tried to ignore it, keep my head down, but then the mail stopped. Not all at once. Just little things at first. Missing packages, envelopes ripped open. I went to the post office and found out someone had filed a temporary mail forwarding request. I hadn't, but guess who had access to the online community portal where resident data was stored? When I reported it to the local police, the officer gave me a long look and said, "Sounds like a civil matter." When I mentioned the HOA, his face went blank. "You're part of Willow Creek?" he asked. I nodded. He sighed. "Yeah, we get calls about them." Emma was the one who snapped me out of denial. She came home from school one afternoon, unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your stomach twist. When I asked her what happened, she hesitated, then said, "Why do the kids at school say we're getting kicked out of the neighborhood?" Apparently, one of the moms, probably Karen's book club sidekick, had been gossiping that our house was under review. Whatever the hell that meant. That night, I sat in my home office, pulled out every document I had, title deeds, HOA bylaws, communications, and spread them out like a crime scene investigation. And I called someone I should have called weeks ago. Susan Houseman, real estate attorney, specialist in property disputes and HOA overreach. A friend of a friend, but the kind of person you kept in your phone just in case the neighborhood turned fascist. When she picked up and I explained the situation, she let out a low whistle. "They're trying to break you," she said. "Classic tactic, financial pressure, social shaming, procedural harassment. You're lucky they haven't towed your car yet." I glanced out the window. Now that you mention it. Susan got to work immediately. First, she sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA, citing lack of jurisdiction and threatening civil action if they didn't rescind the fine. Then she filed a complaint with the state's Office of Homeowner Association Oversight. Yes, that's a real thing. No, I didn't know it existed either. I felt better for about 12 hours. Then I woke up to find someone had dumped a bag of dead fish on my front porch with a note that read, "Hope the lake house was worth it." By the time Susan filed the second cease and desist letter, I'd started documenting everything. Every letter from the HOA, every time their patrol car parked outside my house, every sideways glance from a neighbor who used to ask me about lawn fertilizer. I even installed cameras, 4 of them covering every angle of my property. Paranoia wasn't a bad look anymore. It was survival. Susan said it best. If you're not building a paper trail, you're handing them the match and asking where to pour the gasoline. I digitized all the HOA correspondence, recorded every call I had with Karen, legally of course, since our state's a one-party consent state, and kept a journal. I felt like a damn war reporter embedded in suburban trench warfare. Karen didn't let up. When the HOA realized their previous tactics hadn't broken me, they pivoted to something bolder. They accused me of operating a commercial enterprise out of my lake house. I found out when I received a citation from Emmett County. Someone had filed a complaint claiming I was running an unlicensed Airbnb. I wasn't. The place wasn't even furnished for guests. Hell, the plumbing barely worked half the time, but the inspector still came by, asked to see guest logs. I offered him beer and a tour of my completely empty second bedroom. He laughed, but made me sign a compliance form anyway. I didn't need a crystal ball to guess who had filed the complaint. Karen had zero jurisdiction in Emmett County, but that didn't stop her. She was trying to strangle me from a distance. Susan's voice over the phone was clipped surgical. "We're going to need to escalate." She filed a formal notice to the HOA citing harassment, breach of fiduciary duty, defamation, and abuse of power. She also copied the county commissioner and the HOA's insurance provider. That's when things started getting weirder. I received a notice that my property was being reviewed for structural non-compliance. According to the document, my Willow Creek home had aesthetic anomalies inconsistent with neighborhood standards. What did that mean? My shutters were dark blue, approved shade number 14B. My lawn was within height limits. My mailbox, regulation model HOA issued. I passed every check, but now they were alleging my garage door was unapproved. It had a window. That same window had been there for 9 years. It was literally in the listing when I bought the house. Then came the drone. Emma spotted it first, buzzing around the backyard during a Saturday afternoon when we were grilling hot dogs. She pointed at it mid-bite and asked, "Are we being spied on?" I didn't even hesitate. I waved at it with a pair of tongs, then went inside and checked the camera feed. Sure enough, a compact drone hovered briefly above my roofline, then zipped away over the fence toward the main road. The footage went straight to Susan. The next day, she filed a complaint with the local police about unauthorized surveillance. But since the drone didn't touch my property and no identifying marks were visible, they couldn't do much. I half expected Karen to drop a leaflet from the sky with HOA-approved grilling temperatures. That week, one of the HOA board members, Roger Melnick, a quiet guy who ran the local car wash, called me. He sounded nervous, said he didn't agree with what was happening, said things had gotten out of hand. I asked if he'd be willing to put that in writing. "No," he said quickly, "but you didn't hear it from me. Karen's got something planned." 2 days later, the police showed up. Not a friendly, "how's your lawn" visit either. 3 cruisers rolled up at dusk, lights flashing, officers stepping out with hands on their belts. Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table. She looked up and froze. I opened the door slowly, hands visible. "Are you James Harper?" the lead officer asked. "Last time I checked." We received a report that you were harboring unlicensed weapons and operating an illegal business on the premises. I almost laughed. Then I didn't, because he wasn't smiling. I invited them in, gave them a tour of my very boring, very legal home, let them check the garage, the shed, even the attic. No weapons, no inventory, no customers waiting in line for counterfeit bath bombs. The officer apologized, said they had to follow up on reports like this. When they left, Emma stood in the hallway, clutching her sketch pad like it was body armor. "They thought you were a criminal," she whispered. "No," I said. Karen did. Susan was furious. She filed a civil protection order request against the HOA, arguing that their actions were endangering our safety and mental health. It was denied, for now. But the judge allowed us to submit evidence for a harassment case. That was the turning point. Karen had gone too far. She thought I'd break, but something in me clicked instead. I wasn't just going to fight. I was going to win. By mid-July, my life didn't resemble anything close to normal. My house, my sanctuary, had become a war zone of passive-aggressive warfare and legal chess moves. Trash mysteriously reappeared after pickup. HOA letters came so frequently, I considered training the dog to fetch them. And the neighbors, they avoided eye contact like I had contagious bankruptcy. Susan's harassment case was gaining traction, but it was slow. The court had allowed us to submit documentation, and I had mountains of it. Videos, emails, timestamps, drone footage, and even voice memos where Karen had left thinly veiled threats cloaked in flowery legalese. Still, she hadn't backed down. If anything, she'd escalated. Then came the property revaluation. One Monday morning, a gray sedan with county plates pulled into my driveway. 2 assessors got out, clipboard guys with khakis and suspiciously cheerful faces. One of them introduced himself and said, "We're here for the tax reappraisal of your property, sir." I blinked. Reappraisal? This house has been valued and reassessed 3 times in the past 5 years. What changed? He flipped through his folder. "We received a request from the Willow Creek Homeowners Association to re-examine your lot based on recent modifications and non-conformity citations." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the alternative was starting to scream into the void. They spent 45 minutes walking the property, taking photos, asking questions about materials used on the mailbox post, and deviations in roofing tile texture. When they left, I already knew the result. 2 weeks later, I got the letter. The value of my property had been increased by $180,000. Taxes were going up significantly. I showed it to Susan, and she squinted at the fine print. "This isn't random," she said. "This is coordinated." We filed a protest with the assessor's office. But while that processed, I got hit with a new bill from the HOA. A compliance maintenance surcharge for the strain my property was allegedly placing on the administrative capacity of the community. $4,000. 4 emails generated. And then, because apparently things weren't insane enough, someone cemented my goddamn driveway. It happened overnight. I woke up to Emma shaking me. Panicked. And Dad, someone messed with the driveway. I went outside barefoot, still in my t-shirt and boxers. There it was, a thick, uneven layer of wet cement poured over the edge of the entrance, drying fast under the morning sun. No contractor logo. No permit. Just a greasy handprint on the curb like some twisted HOA seal of approval. I called the police. The responding officer wasn't the same as before. This one looked bored and more than a little annoyed that I didn't have a security camera aimed directly at the driveway entrance. He took photos, filled out a report, and then said, "Could be a prank. Neighborhood kids, maybe." "Right," I said, because teenagers love mixing and pouring 200 pounds of concrete. That night, I sat Emma down and told her something I never thought I'd say. "I'm thinking we should leave." She didn't say anything at first, just kept peeling the label off her juice bottle. "I like the lake house," she said quietly. "I do too." We stayed quiet for a while. Then she asked, "But if we leave, does that mean they win?" She had a point. I hated that a 12-year-old had to frame it that way, but she was right. Karen had turned this into a siege. Every move I made was met with some low-level sabotage or bureaucratic retaliation. My house had become radioactive. I couldn't sell it, not while under ongoing litigation. And if I did, I'd walk away with a target on my back and a cautionary tale pinned to the HOA bulletin board. That night, Susan called. She had news. "The board's holding an emergency closed session meeting this Thursday. I got wind of it from a former treasurer who still checks the internal calendar out of spite. What are they meeting about? Presumably, you. Or more specifically, the motion to accelerate liens against delinquent accounts, which, in HOA language, means they want to move on your house. They can't. I've challenged everything. Doesn't mean they won't try. That's when I got an idea. Not a legal one, not even a smart one, but a necessary one. I'd recently bought a laptop just for work, new, clean, loaded with nothing but video editing software and encrypted cloud backups. It also had a tiny high-resolution webcam built into the top bezel, and as it turned out, I had the right to attend the Thursday meeting as a resident. HOA rules allowed it. So, I RSVP'd, showed up in a plain button-down, nodded politely to the other board members, and placed my laptop on the table like any dutiful HOA slave. And I hit record. Karen called the meeting to order. The usual motion readings, budget notes, blah, blah, blah. Then finally, next item, discussion of unresolved violation assessments and delinquent account protocol. Everyone shifted. A few stole glances at me. Karen didn't flinch. She talked for 12 minutes straight. It was a TED Talk on why I was a corrosive influence. If we allow James Harper to ignore enforcement, we're inviting chaos. Next thing you know, people will be putting up wind chimes and painting their fences purple. Roger, car wash guy, mumbled something about legal exposure. Karen snapped back, "We have the votes." Then she said it. "We just need to hold until the next quarterly dues. Once he's late again, we can push for closure." My stomach went cold. Then another voice chimed in. "Linda, secretary, probably 3 glasses of Chardonnay in. What if he goes public?" "He seems like the type." Karen shrugged. "Let him. Nobody listens to people who lose their houses." I stared straight ahead and smiled. The laptop recorded it all. I sent the recording to Susan that same night. No edits, no notes. Just raw footage. Karen's calm, calculated voice spelling out a foreclosure plan like it was a bake sale. Susan called me an hour later. No pleasantries, just straight to business. "This isn't just abuse of power," she said. "This is premeditated fraud. And that recording, that's dynamite." By morning, she'd already filed an emergency motion for injunction. She also sent a copy of the video to the HOA's insurance provider, just to rattle the cage. Turns out, nothing makes board members squirm like the thought of personal liability and revoked coverage. And still, Karen didn't blink. The next HOA letter was hand-delivered. Certified mail, signature required. The envelope was thicker this time, with the kind of weight that tells you a tree died just to make your life harder. Inside were 4 documents. 1. A revised fine summary, now totaling $52,000. A threat of lien placement within 5 business days. 3. A notice of hearing to suspend resident privileges permanently. 4th, a glossy brochure explaining the benefits of voluntary surrender. Voluntary surrender. Like I was a mobster holed up with a hostage and a box of Cheez-Its. Susan scanned the documents and let out a short, dry laugh. "They're panicking." Good. Let them. That week, I went on the offensive. First, I uploaded the HOA meeting video to a private YouTube link and shared it quietly with a few local homeowners. Not publicly, just enough to start whispers. Then I posted on the Willow Creek Next Door group. A simple message. Curious about how our HOA really works? Watch this. Password, COHESION. The video hit 50 views in 2 hours. By the end of the day, 132. I didn't know most of the viewers, but I started getting emails, messages, even handwritten notes slipped into my mailbox. "Thank you for speaking up." They tried to fine us for planting tomatoes. We had to replace our mailbox 3 times in a year. The lid was off, and people were angry. Then something unexpected happened. A woman named Darlene, who used to be the HOA treasurer before Karen took over, reached out through Susan. She wanted to meet. We did. Neutral ground, a Panera in the next county. Darlene was in her 60s, quiet but sharp. She wore a cardigan that probably hadn't been trendy since Bush Sr., but she had the energy of someone finally off the leash. She changed the bylaws, Darlene told me, about 18 months ago. Added a clause about multi-property obligations. Slid it into the digital version of the covenant, not the printed one. And no one noticed. She timed it around the holidays, didn't mention it in the meeting minutes, said it was a formatting update. Susan nearly flipped her laptop when I told her. "That's illegal," she said. "It violates open governance statutes and procedural disclosure." We got to work. Susan filed a formal civil suit: fraud, defamation, breach of fiduciary duty, malicious prosecution, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She attached the video, the altered bylaws, and a 30-page complaint with more legal firepower than a divorce court on Valentine's Day. The media caught wind fast. Local news called, then the regional ones. HOA scandals were clickbait gold. Man fights HOA tyranny was the kind of headline that practically wrote itself. A young reporter from Channel 8 showed up with a camera crew and asked if I'd be willing to talk on record. I didn't even hesitate. We did the interview in front of my mailbox, the one Karen had threatened to find me over twice in a single week. I stood there in a button-down and jeans, with Emma in the background drawing chalk hearts on the driveway Karen had tried to bury in cement. The story aired that evening. Within 24 hours, the video had racked up 20,000 views. My inbox exploded. Former Willow Creek residents, people from other HOA neighborhoods, even a lawyer in Florida who said, "You've just inspired my own class action." Karen's response came swiftly and with venom. I received notice that the HOA had voted to suspend all privileges indefinitely, citing active harm to the reputation and integrity of the community. The letter was signed by 4 board members and a 5th name I didn't recognize. They were replacing board members now, tightening the inner circle. Karen was circling the wagons, and I was done playing defense. Susan scheduled depositions. Darlene agreed to testify. So did another former board member who'd been quietly pushed out months earlier for failing to maintain proper community spirit. Karen hadn't just gone after me. She'd built a quiet empire of fear, and now the cracks were showing. But the best part? We subpoenaed HOA financials. Turns out Karen had been using HOA funds for some very personal expenses: private investigator bills, drone rental fees, legal consultations to draft cease and desist threats against me, and, get this, against local journalists, all paid through the HOA's general fund. We had receipts, literal receipts. Susan looked at the pile and said, "She's not just going down. She's going to set precedent." I looked out the window toward Karen's house. Her porch lights were on. Her American flag fluttered perfectly centered and regulation height. And for the first time in months, I smiled without bitterness. The reckoning had begun. The day of the first court hearing felt like walking into a battlefield with the sun on your back and a sniper on every rooftop. Susan met me at the courthouse steps, her briefcase loaded with every document Karen probably wished had been lost in a fire. Emma stayed with my sister. She didn't need to see this. Not yet. Karen arrived flanked by 2 HOA board members, both of whom looked like they'd swallowed thumbtacks for breakfast. Her face was carved from stone, not a flicker of doubt, still in pearls, still in control. At least she thought so. The courtroom wasn't large, just a second-floor chamber with cheap paneling and an American flag that looked like it had seen better centuries. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a sharp jaw and no tolerance for posturing, took one look at our exhibits list and raised an eyebrow. Susan began with the timeline: the fine, the fake citations, the inflated home value, the secret drone, the illegal amendment to the bylaws, and finally, the video. When she played the clip from the closed HOA meeting, the courtroom went dead silent. Karen's voice rang out clearly. "We just need to hold until the next quarterly dues. Once he's late again, we can push foreclosure." The judge leaned back, expression unreadable. Then Linda's voice followed. "What if he goes public? He seems like the type." "Let him," Karen replied. "Nobody listens to people who lose their houses." I couldn't tell if Karen realized what she'd done to herself, or if she was still convinced it would all blow over. But I saw one of her board members glance at her like he was seeing a stranger for the first time. Then Susan introduced the financial records, line items for private investigators, payments for drone rentals, transfers to personal legal advisors not connected to HOA matters, HOA-funded threats against local reporters, thousands of dollars misused with breathtaking arrogance. Every one of them signed off by Karen. She tried to object, said it was discretionary spending for security. The judge cut her off. "Security against what, Ms. Woods? Your neighbors?" The ruling came down like a gavel of divine vengeance. Karen was ordered to step down from her position effective immediately. The HOA was placed under temporary third-party financial supervision pending a full audit. All fines against me were vacated. The injunction against foreclosure was granted permanently. But that wasn't the end. Karen didn't go quietly. 2 days after the ruling, she filed paperwork with the county to register a new organization, Willow Creek Preservation League, a private residential advocacy collective with a mission to protect neighborhood character and integrity. I'd seen cults with less threatening charters. The goal was obvious: create a parallel structure, then pressure residents to join voluntarily with promises of reduced dues, new amenities, exclusive newsletters, and the security of knowing your neighbor's care. Susan caught it instantly. She's trying to clone the HOA without the oversight. What she didn't know was that I had a mole now. Roger, the car wash guy, had finally flipped. He'd had enough. He forwarded me an internal group email sent from Karen's new address that made the plan crystal clear. They wanted to recruit a core group, use fear of another James Harper situation, and reassert social control through membership incentives and pressure. They even drafted bylaws that would allow the league to enforce community expectations on non-members through collective resolutions. We took the whole thing to the judge. She was not amused. Karen's new project was slapped with a cease and desist under the claim of fraudulent continuity. Roger's testimony sealed it. He admitted Karen had used her HOA position to collect personal data she was now exploiting to recruit members for the new group. That was a direct violation of privacy statutes. And that was when the dominoes fell. Residents who'd sat on the fence started speaking up. Stories came out. Minor violations used for major fines. People fined for their Christmas lights, for flags, for hosting barbecues with too many cars on the curb. One elderly couple said Karen tried to ban wind chimes, citing emotional noise pollution. The press circled back, now with a narrative bigger than just one man's feud. HOA overreach, privacy invasion, financial misconduct. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was systemic. A state representative reached out, a woman named Alicia Phelps. She asked if I'd be willing to appear at a local hearing about HOA reform. I didn't even think twice. So there I was, a week later, sitting in a community center under flickering fluorescent lights, reading a statement about how a group of unelected suburban bureaucrats had nearly destroyed my life. I told them everything about the fine, the retaliation, the concrete in my driveway, the drone, Emma's fear. And when I looked up, they weren't just nodding. They were furious. After the hearing, Representative Phelps shook my hand. "You're not the only one, Mr. Harper," she said, "but you might be the loudest. And right now, that's exactly what we need." The headlines shifted. HOA tyranny exposed. Local man sparks statewide reform push. I didn't want to be a symbol. I just wanted peace. But maybe peace only comes when enough people say no. No to unchecked authority. No to false fines. No to cement in driveways and fear in children's eyes. Karen's house had gone dark. No porch light. No flag. No smug patrol car circling my street. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt earned. Things didn't go quiet. Not entirely. Karen might have lost her title, her control, and whatever shred of moral high ground she imagined she had, but the storm she'd summoned didn't dissipate overnight. It hovered, smoldered. The kind of mess you don't just sweep up with a broom, but dig out with a backhoe and prayer. The HOA was in shambles. A third-party financial oversight team was appointed, and the new interim president, a retired firefighter named Mel Torres, walked into the position like he was cleaning up after a Category 5 suburban hurricane. I found 4 different versions of the HOA charter, he told me during our first conversation. One of them was printed in Comic Sans. That about summed it up. The board fractured. 2 members resigned within days. Another confessed to signing off on Karen's expenses without reading them. There were whispers about possible criminal charges. Nothing solid yet, but the DA's office requested files. Susan forwarded everything with relish. Meanwhile, the community was in a state of awakening. People started going through their records, questioning old fines, and openly discussing HOA abuses on forums and at the coffee shop like it was the new town square. It turned out I wasn't the only one who'd been targeted. There was the guy who got fined for painting his fence a shade too bold. Aggressive taupe. The family cited for having more than one welcome mat, and even a woman who'd been told her front door wreath violated seasonal decor cohesion. Emma started smiling more, drawing again. Her latest chalk piece on the driveway was a giant octopus strangling a sign that read HOA. I didn't ask where the idea came from. I just helped her shade in the tentacles. But Karen, she wasn't done yet. 3 weeks after the court ruling, I received a letter from a private legal firm, Langston & Crane, a name that sounded like it belonged on a whiskey bottle. The letter claimed I had committed defamation, incited harassment, and willfully interfered with the operational integrity of a registered nonprofit residential governance body. Translation: Karen was suing me for $50,000. Susan read the letter, then laughed so hard she had to put her coffee down. "Oh, this is delicious," she said. "She's trying to countersue from the wreckage of her own legal disaster. We should thank her for the extra leverage." We filed a counter motion for dismissal and sanctions. Then Susan did something I didn't expect. She held a press conference. Small, local, but direct. She stood in front of the courthouse with a binder of evidence in one hand and the HOA's former financial statements in the other. Karen's lawsuit unraveled within 48 hours. The judge not only dismissed it, but issued a formal reprimand citing vexatious litigation tactics and an egregious abuse of judicial resources. Translation: Sit down, Karen. Then the domino that no one expected fell. State Representative Alicia Phelps introduced a draft bill, the Homeowner Transparency and Accountability Act. It proposed sweeping reforms, mandatory public disclosure of HOA budgets and leadership compensation, criminal penalties for fraudulent fines or retaliatory enforcement, a state-level appeals board for homeowners fined by HOAs, caps on HOA-imposed penalties and bans on foreclosure without judicial review, and attached to the draft, a case study titled The Harper Incident, When Governance Becomes Tyranny. I stared at the PDF, blinking. My name, my situation, every step of what had happened, documented, footnoted, and entered into legislative record. I wasn't just a guy fighting back anymore. I was a cautionary tale. Emma found out before I could tell her. One of her classmates pulled up the article on a tablet during homeroom. She came home wide-eyed and asked, "Are we famous?" "Infamous," I said. "There's a difference." She grinned. Cool. That night, the neighborhood was quiet again, but not because people were afraid. They were tired. Tired of walking on eggshells, tired of being bullied by bylaws and beige tyrants. A few neighbors even stopped by, dropping off home-baked cookies, thank you cards, and, bizarrely, a potted cactus. One man, an older veteran named Clyde, handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside was a printout of the HOA charter, with Karen's fake amendment highlighted in yellow. "Been waiting to burn this damn thing for 2 years, he said, then handed me a lighter. We lit it together in my fire pit, watched it curl into smoke and ash while the moon hung low above us. Later, after Emma went to bed, I sat out on the porch of the lake house, the one that started it all, the one that existed outside the suffocating reach of HOA paranoia. I listened to the wind in the trees, the distant chirp of frogs, the whisper of water brushing the dock. No drones, no letters, no surprise reappraisals, just silence. Karen's porch light never came back on. Her house sat dark and still, like the queen had fallen off the board, and no one wanted to pick her up. The HOA was being rebuilt, from the ground up this time. Transparent, accountable, real, and me. I was finally breathing again. 6 months later, life had returned to something resembling normal, or at least a quieter kind of chaos, the kind you could live with. The HOA was no longer a lurking threat, but a restructured skeleton of what it once was, now functioning more like a helpful neighborhood committee than a suburban war machine. Mel Torres had stayed on as president, much to everyone's relief. His first act in office, publicly shredding the HOA's anonymous violation report forms in front of a packed community meeting. His second, hosting a barbecue with free beer and no dress code. That man got a standing ovation for serving ribs in a Hawaiian shirt and blasting Creedence Clearwater Revival from the clubhouse speakers. As for Karen, she vanished. No foreclosure, no dramatic exit, no perp walk in pearls. One day her car was gone. A week later, the blinds were shut. 2 months after that, a moving van showed up and emptied the place. The property sat empty for a while until a quiet couple from Oregon bought it and installed a solar-powered flamingo in the front yard. Mel told me no one said a word. Apparently, the trauma had boundaries. The new HOA charter, rewritten with community input, was clean, public, and blessedly short. No more surprise amendments, no more weaponized bylaws, no more Karen. But the ripples didn't stop there. The bill Representative Phelps introduced, the Homeowner Transparency and Accountability Act, had passed its first committee vote. then another, then shockingly, the house. A few news outlets picked it up, then a few more. And then someone somewhere in D.C. must have been bored enough to notice, because by early spring, I was invited to speak on a panel at a municipal governance symposium in D.C., me. A guy whose only real crime was wanting to drink beer by a lake in peace. Susan nearly cried from laughter when the invite came in. "You're going to be a keynote speaker," she said. "That means you have to wear a tie. Can I sue someone to get out of it? But I'll help you write your speech." I stood on a stage under the seal of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, facing an audience of lawyers, mayors, activists, and a surprising number of very angry condo board members. I told them the story, not just about Karen, not just about the fine or the drones or the cement. I told them about Emma, about what it felt like to have your home, your actual physical space, turned into a front line, about watching a child learn too early that power often comes with a smile and a clipboard, about what it's like to fight back, not because you want to, but because someone decided you shouldn't. Afterward, 3 officials approached me asking for a copy of the recording from that infamous HOA meeting. Apparently, it had become a bit of legend in governance circles. I sent them the link with the password still set to COHESION. It felt poetic. By late summer, the Harper provision, as some reporters were calling it, had been adopted into state law. No HOA in Oregon could issue a fine over $500 without due process. Foreclosures required third-party arbitration. All rule changes had to be ratified by 2/3 of the residents and made public within 7 days. I got a letter in the mail from Representative Phelps. It had a gold seal and a short note. "You made noise. We made change. Thank you." Emma read it 3 times. Then she taped it to the fridge next to her A+ math test and a doodle of a house labeled Our Free Home. In the fall, we hosted a block party. Not an HOA-sponsored one, just ours. We grilled. We played music. We lit up the sky with sparklers and beer-fueled karaoke. Clyde from down the street, who had once quietly paid a $200 fine for having too many lawn chairs, led a toast to the man who bought a lake house and brought down a dictator. Everyone laughed, even me. Later that night, Emma and I sat out on the back deck. The moon was high, reflecting off the pond behind our yard like it was winking at us. "You ever miss it?" she asked. "The way it was before?" I thought about it. About the silence I used to equate with peace. About the smile Karen used to wear. About the cold professionalism of the first letter. About the exact moment I realized the system wasn't broken. It was designed that way. "Not really," I said. "But I'm glad it happened." She tilted her head. "Even the fish on the porch." "Especially the fish," she laughed. And I did too. For once, it didn't feel defensive, just real. We never gave up the lake house. Still go there most weekends. Still grill, still fish. Still laugh when someone brings up the HOA like it's Voldemort. But now, when we come home, it doesn't feel like returning to enemy territory. It feels like coming back to something we earned.